Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Mighty Matt Podcast. I'm Matt Sterling, your host, and I am delighted to be joined today by Xian, a tireless disability advocate, speaker, educator, and founder of the nonprofit Give Beauty Wings. I am so excited to chat with her today. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I usually start these off. I always hated when somebody would say, "What's wrong with you? What's your disability?" So I like to say, when did you become mighty? And when did you understand that you were different from other kids?
It's an interesting question because I think that it was levels of mighty, and because of my parents, being an
Yeah.
only child, there were certain things I was shielded from, but I would say there was a level of denial about my body as I think a survival mechanism. My parents are very social. They always had dinner parties. So I was really comfortable around people, but it was always my mission to kind of minimize that in the moment of connection. Like, yeah, of course I am different, but we are more similar than we are different. So I've said this story many times, but when I was a kid and kids would ask me like, "But Xian, you're normal, right?" I would
Yeah.
always say yes, not because we were trying to make some grand statement about what is normal, but because I understood they were asking for permission to connect with me. And
Sure.
so, but I realized later on, not until my 20s, did I realize that even though I would have told you my disability was a blessing and that I felt mighty, mostly as an only child. And
Sure.
again, because I knew I cut the lines at Disney World and the airport and stuff like that. So I was more aware of what the perks were, and not just those perks, the perks of being a kid, right? Where anything you say is charming, even if it's totally inappropriate, that
Sure.
kind of thing. So I was very aware that I think I knew that I stood out. And so when I was younger, it was about minimizing that at times to make other
Yep.
people feel comfortable. And so I think my full mightiness is when I fully embraced the word disability, when I fully embraced my body as the only one that is precious to me, and that I should love my body
Sure.
because it's my body and not because it's perfect or not perfect or whatever state it's in. I should love my body anyway.
Sure. Now, you talked a lot about your parents. I want to specifically talk about your education. So, what role did they play in that?
Oh my gosh, what role didn't they play? And I think that I even sometimes get criticized for talking about them too much, but it's really because that was my baseline, because
Sure.
they never made me feel like less. They always made me feel like more. That allowed me that by the time I got out in the world and people were reacting differently, it didn't affect me as much as you would think that it would, because I knew what disability was for me. And I knew
Yeah.
that I was loved, and I recognized that to be tremendous privilege. The fact that they were artists also allowed them to be sort of out of the box thinkers and a little bit strange and weird in the ways you want people to be strange and weird,
Sure. Sure.
And, everyone that they were friends with were sort of off the beaten path and, quirky and in a good way, and so they allowed me to be me. They didn't try to tell me how to be in the world. They
Sure.
just tried to support how I already was and to nurture who I was becoming rather than
That's
telling
great.
me what I should be. And I think that that's what allowed me to practice acceptance even when I experienced like questions like, "What's wrong with you?" Like, I knew there was nothing wrong with me. So I'd be like, "Well, funny you should ask." And this is, and then I would give them my personal spin, because that is what my disability is for me, belongs to me.
Yep.
And I think that had my parents not created that bubble when I was growing up, or also access to places like United Cerebral Palsy, even though I was mainstreamed later on, the fact that I started with school kids who none of us were exactly the same, but I knew that there were other kids with CP. I
Yes.
knew I wasn't alone. So even when I was the only kid in my class with a disability, I had that as a baseline.
Having spent, a number of years in living in New York, it's a very complicated place. And add on top of that being disabled, that had to be a huge thing for you to can you talk a little bit about how that was sort of growing up in that environment?
Well, I think actually being in New York, because, it's not a cookie cutter place where everyone looks the same, everyone acts the same. And yes, I guess the spotlight's a little bit bigger when you're in the middle of a street and there's hundreds of people. But I feel like the complicated is actually what made it not feel as strange, in the sense that, like, I don't know, there's people busking, there's, people are doing all kinds of things, that they probably shouldn't be doing,
Yeah.
Um,
I agree with you in so many ways in that respect. Because when I came to New York, I come from a place where everybody's staring at you. You feel very different. But when I got to Manhattan, it was like nobody cared that I was disabled. It was more like, get out of the way, And it would be interesting. That's why I was so anxious to get your perspective, because
yeah,
that had to be kind of freeing to feel just like one of millions versus, this
right.
person that everybody's
Well,
looking
I
out
think
for.
it's different than being in Kentucky, where you're like, I met someone who lives in Colorado, and I was the first Asian person she had met with any kind of
Right.
mobility device that wasn't a wheelchair.
Yep.
And so she had a form of canes. They're not ski poles, but I was the first person she saw that was Asian and similarly disabled, ambulating in a similar way.
Yeah.
And because she was from a town of 20,000 people where there were no Asian people, much less disabled people, that meant so much to her. I will say, representation wise, because I was so niche, I should maybe start by saying, I'm a half Asian, Jewish woman, Chinese and
Yeah.
Jewish woman with cerebral palsy with two shiny ski poles. I knew that I was one of one. Yeah, there were other
Sure.
kids with CP, there's other, women with disabilities, other Asian people with disabilities, but I knew that I was so different in a way that I didn't expect to see myself on television unless it was me.
Sure.
Does
Yeah.
that make
Right.
sense?
It does.
I was also part of the UCP telethon when I was 3. And when I was 3, I was particularly puppy dog like because I actually had, for a short time, I had myasthenia gravis, which for me caused one eye to droop and then both eyes to droop.
Okay.
And so I think I looked kind of adorably vulnerable enough
Sure.
that, like, I was, so I remember being on the UCP telethon, not understanding what was going on, my mom waving to me from the camera going, "Sean, smile," and
Right.
being totally, totally unaware that I was on the TV, except that now I remember that camera in my face. But it's interesting because that was a period where, my mom loved my eyes. And when my
Yeah.
eyes started to droop, it made her incredibly sad. But
Yeah.
that was the year that I was in the newspaper the most, that I was on
Right.
TV the most. So it was like that was the year I was the most disabled and the most, like, marketable for their purposes, like an ASPCA commercial or something. Just
I was going to move on and ask you about your path to design and beauty and fashion.
Yeah, so as I told you, it was really my parents that, my mom worked in the cosmetics industry. Her first job was at Estee Lauder, then Avon for 8 years. So she really that was her area. And then it wasn't until I had been running the workshops on self-esteem for a while that I was also asked to judge an assistive technology competition.
Oh.
And I was really exposed to the idea of collaborative innovation because we worked with developers as they were developing that technology.
Yep.
And we got to see how they created so much better than I could imagine. But also, we were able to give feedback like, is it waterproof? Like,
Right.
how long does the battery last? That kind of thing. And once I had finished that project, I also met Grace Junn at Open Style Lab. And at the
Oh,
time,
cool.
she was about to start, she had just left MIT. Let's go back. She had just left MIT and was about to start these courses at Parsons where she wanted to design for people with disabilities.
Yeah.
And it was so early in her process, she was like, "Oh, I'm having trouble finding people. Maybe I'll just design for you." And I actually said, "Grace,
Oh,
it's
nice.
super important that you don't just design for me because there's so many people who need you."
Yeah.
And I felt comfortable doing this project, working with the designers, because I had done the AT&T thing. But what really blew me away about the process with OSL, or Open
Yeah.
Style Lab, and Parsons was they created a video that shared our story. They followed me
Sure.
around. They went to a coffee shop. They wanted to see me put on, because what I requested was a
Yep.
waterproof, sort of something I could wear to speaking engagements that was also like rainproof,
Sure.
so that I didn't have to wear a Disneyland poncho
Yeah, yeah,
for
right.
speaking engagements. And so they had me, they wanted to watch me put on the coat and how I
Yep.
do it, because I can't put a coat on myself while
Yep.
standing. My hands are
Right, right.
occupied. And so I would be sitting there and putting this on, and every time my coat would get caught on the back of my chair.
Yep.
So they created something I didn't even ask for, which was a higher coat tail.
Nice.
And because Give Beauty Wings, at the time it was self-esteem program only,
Yep.
was so important to me, and purple was my favorite color, they put purple wings inside the coat, Matt.
Oh, cool.
And it was inside the coat, so it felt like a little secret for me.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And so I left that project not only being designed for, but as I've said many times, feeling loved, which is something
Yes.
that you can't quantify for.
That's right.
And, love and fashion aren't famously paired together
No.
typically. So it was a very transformative experience. And because of that, I continued to work with the Cerebral Palsy Foundation, had
Yeah.
a Design for Disability project the next year. And then I did it again the next year. And we worked with Derek Lamb and Anna Sui, who were both incredibly
Ooh, nice.
lovely, generous,
Yeah.
and so they were such allies in that process. And so I didn't think I had anything to contribute to fashion. And then I didn't even really talk about this part, but my foray into any kind of advocacy started after I worked for that theater and
Yep.
realized I wanted to talk about our value as human beings. I
Sure.
really wanted to talk to kids and parents because, like my own experience, realizing there was a benefit to that bubble that I lived in, I wanted to talk to
Absolutely.
kids and parents, had no clue how to talk to them. And I said, where else do we get our sense of self-esteem? And there's lots of answers to that. We could say media, representation in general, but the answer that
Yep.
came to me at the time was the beauty industry. There was
Yes.
no one at that time visibly disabled in any ad that I could see,
Right.
and no major beauty company had done that yet. And to me, Dove was already celebrating women of all
Yeah.
sizes, older women. And so I pitched the Dove campaign
I
publicly.
saw that video on your site. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was my first bit of advocacy. But I was so
Yeah.
new that I didn't think to caption it. I didn't think to audio describe. And also,
Right.
technology has gotten a lot easier to do that. But
Yep.
I will be honest, when I pitched it, I was thinking about mobility disabilities.
Right.
But then I got letters from a woman with rheumatoid arthritis. I got letters from a man with AIDS for 30 years. I
Sure.
got letters from the Philippines, Japan, Australia.
It's
And
so
that's when I
cool.
started to realize, wow, the disability community is so much bigger than I even thought.
Yeah,
In
that's
my
right.
only child bubble, I had a very limited, and my CP bubble, right? I had a
Yeah, right.
limited idea of what disability looked like and felt like. And I think that's important to note too. Now
Yep.
I'm more of an advocate because I try to, not only do I try to talk to my friends with disabilities that I've met along the way and understand what they need, what they're sharing with me that they need, but
Yep.
also being part of Real Abilities, I'm able to see films about experiences that are
Yeah.
totally different than
Sure.
mine. To learn about things like ADHD or
Yeah.
Alzheimer's or SMA, anything,
Yeah.
and I like that because a lot of those are firsthand narratives.
Yep.
When we have a lot of documentaries that come through, and I love that and each person is totally different. You can have 12 different
Right.
documentaries about SMA or autism or anything,
Sure.
and it's one experience, right? Because
Yep.
disability is such a wide spectrum. But that's, to me, it's not only my love of film, but it's my love of the disability community, that I would like to hear as many stories as I can so
Yeah.
that I have an arsenal. So when I am advising companies, I
Yep.
can say, my friends in the deaf community tell me this.
Yeah.
And I'm not speaking for the entire community, but I can at least
Sure.
say, so now I went from a self-advocate to someone that can at least, and if I don't know, I have friends that I can now refer.
You can reach out to, right, to get their
And I
perspective.
can say, hey, I don't know about this, but I do have a friend who does. Yeah, and I think that's what being an ally really is too, is like knowing when it's not your time to talk and being able to say, this isn't my area, but let's give the spotlight to someone else who does have expertise
Totally.
in this.
That leads me into my next question. You've done so much great work in terms of the disability community and people's individual sense of self-esteem. And
Well, I got to tell you, I wasn't planning this at all. And I think what happened was it was my second job ever. It was for a theater that was very inclusive of disability, telling all kinds of marginalized stories. It was every race, gender, sexuality, 45 members total, actors, studio actors. And we would sit in on these writing sessions when I was the grant writer. And then about 6 months into that, I started to write alongside them. Was totally intimidated by the company I was keeping. And then I started to hear what they were talking about and whether they had disabilities or not. I mean, it was about suicide attempts and that they hated their bodies. Maybe it was because of disability. And there was something about that it really disturbed me, because these are the most talented people I've ever met. These are people I'm looking up to.
Sure.
And I thought, if this is how they're doing and I look up to them, how's everyone else doing? And it sounds completely almost like, how dumb could you be that you didn't notice this before? But I genuinely thought it was this terrible stereotype that people with disabilities were suffering, because I was so in that bubble. And, I think I wasn't even a self-advocate yet at that point, much less an advocate for others,
Sure.
And so it was so that was a jarring realization, and it led me to running workshops on self-esteem for girls and women and people with disabilities specifically, because I just wanted to make sure that no one ever felt like less because of who they are, period.
Sure.
And especially around disability, so I would ask questions like, what do you love about disability? What are some perks?
Yeah.
My friend Brian and I joke that we want to start a podcast called Cerebral Perksy about all the perks.
That's right.
But then everyone would know our secret sauce and some of those perks would go away.
So I want to talk about Give Beauty Wings.
Sure.
And what the impetus was for you to start the foundation.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. And I mean, it kind of dovetails with what we just talked about. Give Beauty Wings started as a self-esteem program, but evolved because I realized that nobody was talking in and around leadership or empowerment. And there's a lot of conversations that were not being had around disability and money, disability and dating. And my most recent event through Give Beauty Wings was because I know all these amazing disabled artists that the community may know who they are, but the wider community has no idea. We know that we are excellent and that we are creative and that there's so much going on. But I just was so inspired by the people I was friends with, whether it's Galen Lee, who plays the violin, the way you might play a cello. And, she won NPR's, Tiny Desk Award years ago. The people part of Ramped, which is RAMPD, which she co-founded with Lachi, somewhat famous and should be more famous blind singer. And so I was really inspired by the people that were in my life that I felt like outside of the disability community, nobody knew about. So I wanted to design an event where everywhere, all your senses were touched by some kind of disabled art. So even people who couldn't make it, we had Alice Shepard flying through the air on screen in her wheelchair doing an aerial dance, and we had someone in the space. I partnered with Wandercraft, which is this exoskeleton company.
Yep.
And they had someone painting in the Wandercraft machine, which then he finished by the end of the evening. And it was
Oh,
amazing
cool.
to see the before and the after and be part of that process. We had Millicent Simmons, who's known for A Quiet Place. She played John
Yeah,
Krasinski and Emily Blunt's daughter in that, and it was directed by John Krasinski. That film, to me, should have won an Oscar.
sure.
And I'm not a horror person, but
Yeah, me
I'm
neither.
still affected by that film, and so when I had a chance to meet her, I was able to tell her how I felt about her role in it and how powerful it was for me, and we became friends from that. And so she
Yeah,
actually flew in for this event, and it was meant to be a celebratory experience, but also revelatory for those who
sure.
don't know what we know, which is that there are so many talented people with disabilities that deserve to be celebrated. So for me, that's also empowerment, and to be able to
Yeah,
talk about the difficulties of being hired as an artist, period, but then also as a disabled artist, there's extra levels and layers to that.
absolutely. Absolutely. That's really exciting stuff. Do you have anything that's coming up that you're planning right now?
Well, for sure. Every year I do a fashion and beauty panel
Oh, cool.
for Real Abilities Film Festival where I'm on the selection committee.
Yep.
And one thing I love about Real Abilities is they have the comedy festival. They have an industry summit. And then, there's often Heidi Latsky Dance is there. So what I love about them is, yes, of course, as selection committee members, we're really committed to the narratives that we're, putting forth
Yep.
in terms of disability representation on screen. But what I love about them is that they just want to see culture shift. And so they have
Yep.
used that week to shine a light on all different kinds of representation. So this was a brainchild of one of the co-directors at the time, Yara Kadem, and
Yep.
myself. Just realizing there were a couple of films around fashion and beauty that seemed
Yeah.
to also lend itself to this conversation, and we just kept doing it year after year. And so that's one I know that will happen in 2026. Real Abilities is the 23rd to the 30th of 2026 this coming year. So I don't have the date for the fashion panel just yet, but if
No, but that's
people
great.
want to go to realabilities.org, you will soon know. As soon as I know, everyone else will know. So that's something I know for sure that we're doing. I'm
Yep.
also on the New York Tech Alliance board and Civic Hall board. And so I know that we will be doing something for Global Accessibility Awareness Day that I co-host with the New York Tech Alliance every year.
Yep.
This will be my third year doing it. And yeah, so those are some
That's
of the things I
great.
know for sure.
Yeah.
Um, it
Yeah.
it really depends on how much we're able to raise between now and then as to what happens later in the
Yep.
year. But yeah, no. So,
That's
it
wonderful. You're so busy. You're making me really miss New York. I left,
come
20
back.
some
I'm
years
still
ago.
here waiting for you, Matt.
I know. I know. I love it so much. But that leads me into my next question,
Sure.
which is because since I've left, there have been so many transformative things that have happened in the city. And I wanted to get your perspective because you
Sure.
spent a long time there. And, as
About
you
my
look
whole
at,
life except for college. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So as you look at like the new Penn Station or the new LaGuardia, do you feel like things are getting better and more accessible and more inviting to the disabled community?
Sometimes bigger is not better.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful to the wheelchair contingent that is in the airports because things have gotten bigger. And I mean, I think in some ways it's more accessible, but I think the assumption often is for wheelchair users. And
Yeah.
so sometimes the ramp is like 2 blocks away from where I'm walking. And now I, did consult on accessibility with the Whitney when the new Whitney
Oh,
was
great.
being built, but it was already built. So the distance from the
Right.
entrance to like where you had to go to get to the ramp is so long that even when I was last there, people look down at it and they're like, "Oh, you don't want to go that far. Here, let me help you up the stairs." Right? And so that was something that was already built by the time I came in. So it's like, sometimes I think we also have to realize where we put the elevator, where we put the ramp matters.
The other thing I was going to ask you is,
Sure.
what do you think about Mom Donnie?
Hey, you know what? I'm hopeful. I think that
Me
he's
too.
probably I'm thinking that he's probably going to be more disability inclusive than maybe the
Yeah.
other options would have been. Um,
Yeah.
I, you know,
Courtesy.
I think, obviously anyone that's new at this, we got to have extra support for them. But I'm hopeful. I've been working, apart from whoever was in power, I've always been a fan of the mayor's office for people with
That's
disabilities
great. That's great.
because they truly do listen. And I can tell you even privately the conversations that I've had with the mayor's office for people with disabilities, how much they really do listen to the community.
Yep.
But I think under Mom Donnie's leadership, we can make even more progress.
Absolutely. Okay,
Yeah.
now we're gonna have some fun if you're ready.
Okay. We weren't having fun before?
No, we're
I thought
having
we were
more
having
fun
fun.
now. That was great fun, but this is gonna be
Okay.
real fun. So
Bring it on.
I'm gonna close this with 2 questions. One of which is, what's the funniest thing someone has asked you about your disability?
Oh my God, there's so many.
Like the 2 or 3.
Gosh, I don't even know where to start. I will say, there was a guy, this was very long time ago.
Yeah, that doesn't matter.
There was a guy I grew up with, and I think when there was a possibility that we were going to date, I think the funniest thing is because I knew a family member of his who was also
Yep.
disabled, instead of asking me like things directly, he created this project. Okay, I shouldn't even be talking about this, but I'm going to anyway. He created
That's all
this
right.
project, and in the middle of this project, he was like, "Yeah, so, like sex, how does that work?" And I wanted to be like, if you wanted to ask me that, you
Yeah,
didn't have
you
to
can
ask
just
me
go
that
ahead
in
and
front of
ask.
your
You don't have to do a
sister,
project.
My God, I hope he never listens to this
No,
because
and I can
he's
certainly edit
married
it
with
out too.
kids now, so.
Oh, that's good. Well, he's figured it out, I
But
guess.
I was also kind of angry because I was like, you
Yeah.
could have just sat down and talked to me about this. You didn't have to I think, obviously it's out of respect. You don't want to be
Absolutely, and
disrespectful, I
people get
guess.
in their own
But
heads
by the
about
way, my
things.
pastor was also part of this conversation. I was like, "You really going to ask me this in front of our pastor?" Okay, thanks.
Oh
I
my
mean,
God.
luckily my pastor's the type of person that he grew up in the clubs of New York. He's seen
Yeah,
everything.
so he knows the deal.
He's not overly pious or sheltered in any way. So he didn't even blink, but I was sort of like, "Are you really doing this right now?"
I'll tell you a funny story.
Yeah.
So when I was a kid in Ohio, the public school was not accessible. So my parents put me into a Catholic grade school. And we're not Catholic, we're Methodist, but it was nuns, the whole thing, right? So, they say, let's have a meeting. And okay, I come in. And, I was a talkative little kid. And they're like, oh, this is going to be great.
I could see some things haven't changed, Matt. I can
No,
tell we could
exactly
talk
right.
for
I never
hours.
know when to shut up. After the meeting, apparently my mom tells a story. She's like, the head nun asked my mom. And meanwhile, I'm in the 6th grade. She's like, so will Matthew be able to have children? Like, what are you talking about?
Like he's
This is
12.
a
Do we even know if he
6-year-old?
wants kids?
Yeah,
What?
I mean, are you trying to hook up with him? Like, what's going on here? Should we be calling the Pope right now?
Well,
God.
and then keep in mind he's asking this in front of his sister, so now he has to hear his sister's
Yeah.
perspective on this. I'm like, do you really want to know how your sister
Yeah.
would have sex? I don't think so.
This is not
It's so
a
awkward.
topic for discussion. God. Okay. So my last question, and this is, I like this question because it elicits some interesting responses.
Okay.
So if I were to clone you and there were 2 Johns in front of me, what question would I ask to reveal the real you?
You mean to test which one is me versus which one's the
A
robot?
clone. Yeah, exactly.
Gosh. I don't know. I think it might be my love of chocolate because I don't
Oh,
know if
really?
the robot would like chocolate as much as I do.
And what type of chocolate do you love?
And then, I mean, it depends. If it's a human clone, it's a totally different. I think the human clone would have probably the same impulses that I do, right? So I want to ask a technical question, which is, we're talking about an alien slash
Yeah, well, yeah, I like
non-human
that you're
me.
really diving into this. I'm thinking like I like mayonnaise or pickles.
Okay, yeah, no, I think I'm gonna go with the chocolate answer. I'm a
That's a
real
great
chocoholic.
answer.
If you ever hear me deny myself chocolate, you know something is
There's
wrong
something's
or it's
wrong.
not me. Aliens have
Now,
taken over.
here's my follow-up question,
Sure.
and this will be important for anyone visiting Manhattan. What's your favorite chocolate place?
Well, Jacques Torre or Torres, I've heard it said as Torres, who I actually met once and kind of scared him because he's very French. And
Yeah, sure.
in college, my roommate and I, when we were both single, we're going to Wesleyan, where honestly, most of the guys aren't interested in women. So we didn't know
Right.
that when we went there. And so we were like, okay, it's okay. Whatever happens, like, we'll just share Jacques Torre.
Sure.
And so, like, obviously not factoring in the fact that he's married or anything like that. And so my mom's best friend actually knew him quite well. And one day he came in on his bicycle and she introduced us. And I said, my friends and I want to marry you. And I thought he would laugh, but he looked horrified. So I scared him, but I still love his chocolate. Another great one is Venchi. If it's gelato, I love Anita Gelato.
Yep.
There's always a line, but there's a reason. There's even a line in the winter. I cut the lines generally.
Of course, you have to.
But yes, that is one of my areas of expertise, which is why I had multiple answers for you.
That is excellent. And that's also very good data for anyone that's out there.
Yeah,
so I appreciate you sharing that.
What I like about those three places, Jacques Torre for the quality of chocolate, I think is a really reasonable price. Not to mention that they have the most delicious hot chocolate you'll ever try.
Oh, okay.
And so, so my favorite.
What was that other place on the east side everybody used to go to?
Oh,
for
you
hot
mean
chocolate?
Serendipity?
Serendipity, that's it.
Yeah, but it has a couple of steps.
Yeah, I think that's why I never went. I
And
was too busy
it's a very American style chocolate, not as thick as some of the European style chocolate.
All right.
So again, me being kind of a chocolate snob, I always went there. I love their frozen hot chocolate still to this day.
Yep.
And they used to there was a lady who worked there since the 60s who always let me cut the lines when it was 2 and 3 hours.
Nice.
Now there's not as much of a line. But again, I don't know if I would want to recommend that one because they still do have the 3 steps.
Yeah, no, the hell with them.
No, we wish them well. But anyway, there's levels to all of this, and it's iconic. They've been around since the 50s. There's a table where Marilyn Monroe used to sit and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that they now have some stiff competition, though.
That's great. That's great. Well, listen, I appreciate you taking the time. You have done so much for the community, and I want to thank you for all of that work that you've done.
Right back at you, Matt.
And, in my little way, I'm trying to get the word out and the message out to people that, being disabled is a good thing. And you can experience life to its fullest. And you're a perfect example of it. I hope you enjoyed that episode. And I hope you'll click like and subscribe so you can meet the mighty.